So a new film came out called In Flames, out in cinemas from last Friday. We're talking about it a little bit late. My name is Phil and I'm joined by Chris. A little bit late because we've had so many films to talk about recently, but this is definitely one that we both wanted to see. It's an incendiary horror thriller, so says the press release. We'll decide whether it is a bit later, and we'll tell you what our thoughts are. But it tells the story of the psychological impact of gendered oppression and the horror of being young and in love in a fiercely patriarchal society. I thought this was such a fascinating story, and I think it's a really strong feature directorial debut as well from an award-winning writer and director, Zarrar Kahn. Chris, did you know much about this film before?
I did not, and I've got to say words like incendiary and horror kind of piqued my interest and then disappointed me in terms of what the film is, because I just don't think those are the words to use around this film. Now, you and I slightly disagree about this, but you know, I really, really enjoyed it. I think it was a great film, and I think at every turn, all of these people's lives in Pakistan are affected by traditions around gender, and you know, things like what's going on is that a grandfather has died, the father's already died in the household, the grandfather then dies, and the matriarch is sort of left with her kids to kind of work out what to do next, and who comes into the fray to help them sort it out? A man. And of course, what does he want out of it? Anything he can get, you know, and it's not about them, it's about him. And the situation you can kind of see unfolding in the background of this, or in parallel with this, the daughter of the matriarch is starting to explore how she feels about men in the world, and she's absolutely deeply affected by some of the negative things that happen around her. She's approached and attacked in the street at one point. She's threatened by men, you know.
Yeah, a man throws a brick through her car window.
Absolutely, merely because she's not wearing appropriate clothing or she's driving the wrong direction or something stupid. I mean, she didn't do anything wrong, basically. So her life is kind of affected by men, you know, telling her what to do all the time. And what she's doing, though, is that she's also kind of waking, you know, she's awakening. She's 25, but she's kind of awakening sexually and kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe I can explore that. And she starts to sort of talk to men and try and understand what they might be able to give her. And of course, sometimes, you know, there's nothing, they don't want to give her anything. It's all about what they want. But, you know, she goes on this journey, literally and metaphorically, with this man. And, you know, it's just an amazing context to be telling this story within. You know, it's an incredible thing.
Such conflicting emotions for me. I mean, just you explaining that so brilliantly as well, summing up the story, it's given me goosebumps because I feel really sad. I feel really, I don't know, I thought it played out really powerfully, and both on an emotional scale and also from a kind of sheer terror, because there's terror in the form of trying to understand how these women feel, and obviously we will never understand how these women feel because we're men. That's something that should be spoken about. And yes, this is fiction, and yes, it has horror elements, but the horror elements are there because they're telling the story of that, which obviously is an important story to tell, and that's why I loved it. And I think it's been done before in different ways with films like Under the Shadows and The Babadook as well, to a certain extent. I mean, that, you know, that film tapped into psychology and the power of grief and trauma, done powerfully and really intelligently as well. And that's the horror that I drew from it. The horror of that story, not necessarily jump scares, not necessarily gore and violence. I mean, there is a little bit of violence in this, but it's not overplayed. It's there for a reason.
It's horrific in the true sense of the word, isn't it? It's horrific in terms of the horror that these people face, and as you say quite rightly, the kind of trauma that they endure, having been through some of the things they live through on a daily basis, and because their society is telling them how to live. So there's horror around all of that. There's also a kind of flashbacky type motif that kind of happens quite a lot in the film, where there are reminders of what happened previously to people and kind of flashbacks. But again, that's about trauma. That's about real horror. That's not about horror in terms of movie horror, as you say. It's not about scares or
like ghosts and zombies and ghouls. I mean, there are ghostly figures in this. I mean, it would be spoilery to say what those horror elements are. I've read a couple of reviews that do mention those, and I think you should just go into it without really knowing too much about it and just see what you get out of it. Because I think those elements are quite simple, but they're expertly executed, and they really add weight to the tension of that narrative of the story. So, that's why I thought it was really, really great.
It's all in service, all of that drama is in service of the horror and the trauma that these people are enduring. You know, it's not for its own sake. You know, you don't see any of the horrific things for their own sake. They all happen because of the conditions these people are living within, you know, and the society and the culture that they live within. And that's, I think, you know, for me, the weight, it's more a film about that than it is about the kind of flashbacky, horrific kind of PTSD type things. It's about the whole social structure that these people are living within, and you know, it's intriguing because of that. It's a really compelling watch. You know, I watched it, you know, from beginning to end. You know, and sat there and watched the whole thing. You know, totally taken in by the whole thing. It was a great watch.
Do you think if it was sold to you as a drama or a thriller? Maybe not necessarily as horror, you would have been more in awe of it?
Again, I think thriller's a slightly difficult word. I think, you know, anyone who writes this kind of text is going to be acutely aware that every word you use means something. And unfortunately, there are quite loaded meanings around words like horror and thriller. I think drama, I found it more of a dramatic movie than I did either of the other things, for sure. And for me, it was about the drama of those situations and those people's lives, much more than it was about the sort of horrific consequences. So, yeah, I would consider this film to be a very strong drama, you know, with little, you know, suggestions of horror around the edges.
Horror means different things to different people, doesn't it, I guess? But I could definitely see the horror in it. I mean, you know, there are so many ways of calling a horror movie now. I mean, some people call a horror film, like, what is it, elevated horror? I mean, I don't necessarily think we should subgenre it. I mean, a horror is horror for different reasons, but yeah, I could definitely see the horror in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I slightly saw it as a social drama with some horrific consequences, but you know, it's beautifully shot. I mean, it's a beautiful film to look at. I found myself really... Have you ever been to Pakistan or India? Because I went to India like 30 or 40 years ago, and at certain times, certain things can really trigger some of the sensory stuff around that, mainly the smells, because they're very, very particular. And lots of this film really took me back into some of those places. It's really evocatively shot. I think the performances are incredibly strong. I think the women in particular, which is slightly the point of this film, put in some incredible performances, you know, the kind of hardships they're enduring. And there's something incredibly believable about their performances, something incredibly credible. The men generally are fairly bumbling idiots in it, which is kind of what they're supposed to be portraying. And I think that, you know, it looks beautiful. It's well written. It's well shot. You know, it's a great film.
With some sadness to it. Again, you know, we can't talk about that in detail because it would spoil it. But yeah, the sadness does add weight, particularly at the end when you realise where it's going, and then when it, you know, that final scene plays out, it's heartrending, and it makes the story just fall into place as well. It's brilliantly wound up at the end. Shall I go for a star rating first? Because it's usually you. I know we did it on another one recently.
Go on then, you go first, Phil.
I'm going for 5. It ticked all the boxes for me. I loved it. I thought the performance was great. Story was fascinating. I thought it had real heartrending qualities as well as really powerful moments. I thought the horror was excellently executed for the type of story it was telling. A feature directorial debut as well, which is amazing to think that's first feature film from this guy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to say this is an incredibly strong film and I absolutely recommend it. But my caveat is going to be, don't go and watch it if you're expecting a horror or a thriller. that's formulaic. You know, it's because it's absolutely unformulaic in both of those descriptions.
And that's why I loved it for that reason.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I know it is, and I think I'm going to dock 1 mark off it for misleading press. So that's annoying because I'm only going to give it 4. But I'm afraid the person I'm taking, or the people I'm taking the point off, are the people who are selling the film, not the people who made it. Because the people who made it, I think, made a really great film. I think the way it's being sold is slightly off the mark for me. But I think it's an incredibly good film. If I could give the film 5 and the marketing 4, I could do that. But I'm going to have to give it 4.
It's funny, your reaction is very similar to the people that I took to see The Babadook when that came out at the cinemas, because I think they were expecting something else, and it wasn't the film that they went in to see. And yeah, they were really, but even more so disappointed. I mean, I think they would probably give that 1 star, but I certainly went the other way and gave it 5. But yeah, it's called In Flames. It is out in cinemas. Go and see it on the big screen. I haven't seen it on the big screen, but I really want to see it again. It's definitely stayed with me as well, and it's definitely one of my favourite films of the year. I thought it was really powerful. Yeah,
very powerful film, very well executed. You know, you're pretty faultless.
But he's still giving it 4. You won't be budged.
I told you I'm giving the film 5 and the people around the film 4. So unfortunately, it's a 4.
Good to see you, Chris. You're off on your holes tomorrow. Enjoy.
I am. I'll be coming back looking like Judith Chalmers with a donkey under my arm. But I will see you soon. Yes.
Hang on, look. He's going Judith Chalmers as we speak. He's put on the suntan lotion. Oh, too late.
Oh my God, I look ill.